Hi, Jeff Lawton here, and this is the last of the series from the hotel room because we're flying home from Melbourne to Brisbane, and then we're getting picked up to drive to Zaytuna Farm, and we should be there later on this afternoon, early this evening, and normal life begins again. And I think I'll report again like this. It's been so popular. You've liked the way I've answered. You've liked to be able to answer questions. I might ask from particular parts of the farm, like compost questions or food forest questions or home garden questions, kitchen garden questions, solar panel questions, renewable energy questions, reed bed questions. I might go from location to answer your questions. And we'll try and do some live if we've got fast enough internet. So let's get into a few questions here. And I'll also do my best to get to the rest of these questions. I mean, it's over 200. So it's definitely been popular. Let's give it a go. First, it's Meng Meriano Sanchez. Hi, I'm from the Philippines and keen to have a small holding after this pandemic. Like a lot of people will, I think, Meng. It's been a wake-up call. I would like to know how far apart should trees, pioneer and fruit be planted from each other? Thanks, and safe as always. Stay safe. Okay, Ming. Listen, you look at your fruit trees and you get them as close as you dare in relation to their future size. So eventually we're going to have a canopy that just about closes off or does close off. It doesn't matter if they touch a bit. You get reduced production but less maintenance. Depends how intense you want your food forest to be. Closed canopy, nowhere near the same amount of work, a little bit less production, but not much because you've got layers underneath. So first off, place your largest trees. In your case, jackfruit, mango, that sort of thing. Durian if you're in a drier part of the Philippines. Get them closer together, close as they will be at maturity. Space mat. Don't worry if you put a few extras in. If you can afford it, if they're cheap enough, you can always cut them out later. You can be the orchestrator of sacrificial extraction because you're managing the sequence of succession. That's what you're actually doing. You're space stacking and time stacking. Now, when it comes to the support species, cram them in as close as you dare. I mean, put massive amounts, 4 times what they recommend in annual cover crop. Really smash it in. Go really thick because it's only annual or maybe it's biannual. You might be using the same species as palm oil uses in the tropics because there's no wind, there's no ill wind that doesn't blow somebody some good. The palm oil have to cover their ground even though they're mostly chemical, but they have to control their tropical ground, and they've researched great nitrogen fixing cover crops while they get their palm oil monoculture nightmares up. But Get it really thick at the ground cover. Then your fast short-term legumes, get them super thick too. It doesn't matter if they're overcrowded at all because they're all sacrificial. They're going to be out in 4 or 5 years. And then your medium-term legumes, they're pretty thick too. I mean, it's always easier to have more than less when it comes to the workers. It's always easier to have more workers than less workers. And the ones that don't work or they got bad genetics or they get damaged for some reason or other, you just cut them down. I mean, every plant on planet Earth, every bit of vegetation dies if you don't let it grow leaves. And the material that you cut is beneficial for the soil. And the root zone that dies behind it is beneficial for the soil in beautiful patterns. So don't be worried. If you can do it, cram them in, oversupply. And then your long-term legumes also put more than is possible to fit longer in the long term because you want at least 5 to 10% of the volume of the food forest in the end in long-term cycling nutrient in large legumes. And you have a lot in the tropics. You have some great, Nadia will take this one so I can keep going. But they're getting ready to check us out. Okay, so with those long-term legumes, you can cut them. And you don't have to cut them right down to start with. You cut them halfway down or pollard them just above your head. Let them grow extra mulch.
Yes.
Let them grow lots of extra mulch. And when you're ready, just take them right to the ground and coppiced them. That is the guaranteed way. The forest, the forest lives on a fallen forest. And we're the elements that cycle those branches and organic matter to the soil. So, and the soil in a forest is all mouth, and the fungi in the soil are the teeth that eat the lignum fibre in the wood. Right? So the fungi, although they look soft, they're pretty tough. They break down organic matter in the form of wood, and especially in the tropics, where you really have to feed the soil because you've got fast tropical cycles. So don't be afraid to put in logs down, but get them short enough that the long length of the log is touching the ground, and try and sit them on contour. And if you want to make it convenient, make that a contour footpath, at least, well, close to 1 metre wide, but no narrower than 60 centimetres, because that's the width of a wheelbarrow. Hope that helps. All right. Now we have Pavlos Georgiadis. Hi, Jeff. Glad you are getting through all this all right. I've watched many of your videos. Thank you. I'm an ethnobotanist, so regenerative, high-density systems make a lot of sense. I've been building soil for the last 10 years in an ancient olive grove in northeast Greece. The quarantine has finally given me time to plant an edible forest, create a worm box, and I'm now building Hügelkultur inside raised beds. I have one question. Are old olive woodlogs good to use inside Hügelkultur? They will decompose very slowly, and I'm worried the oils in the hardwood would be toxic to the herbaceous crops. Here is a project if you would like to see some photos. And it says Calypso single varietal extra virgin olive oil. Well, I'll try and look at that, Pavlos, but my question is, have you ever seen a good Hügelkultur? Have you? Really? I haven't. I've asked people. I keep asking people, you've got some photos of an abundant Hügelkultur? I see average ones sometimes. I mostly see them being built. I see lots of permaculture elements being built. That's easy to build things. Do they work? Are they working a few years later? Are they working 10 years later? What about 20? How about a time sequence? The other thing I have to be considerate about, Hügelkultur might work high up in the mountains in Austria, where sort of Sepp Holzer came up with the idea, and there's been some records that possibly it's an old cold climate European system. Let's just think about decomposition a minute. And organic high carbon materials in the soil. And why don't we bury organic matter anymore? Let's think about those things before we jump into something that may work in one climate, but might be questionable in another, because that's how we've caused a lot of problems in the world. Switching particularly cold European systems into deserts and tropics, even into the Mediterranean, actually. So let's have a think about it, right? When hard, woody, high carbon, slow to break down materials are put into the soil, they have to extract nitrogen from the soil to break down. Because without nitrogen, carbon doesn't break down. It's the interaction between the enormous diversity of life in the soil and all their nitrogen elements and life and death, life and death, life and death, that adds nitrogen to the high carbon material that makes it rot. Now, that's okay in the tropics. It can happen right at the surface. But if you put woody material buried in the hot climates or the dry climates, and Greece is pretty dry at times, right? The Mediterranean is the driest of the temperate climates. It starts to break down slowly, right? And it takes the nitrogen from the soil. Now, in the cold climates, that happens in the winter, not the growing season, the winter, when you get damp rot and wet rot. And there's lots of decomposition happening in the colder time of the year when it's damp and dank. Cold doesn't mean that there's less microorganisms in the soil. In fact, the highest number of microorganisms in any soil we've ever found so far since the soil food web and the work of Elaine Ingham and all this wonderful stuff that's happened in the last 10, 12 years has been the cold growth conifer forests. Because there's summer and winter combinations, and one goes dormant and the other comes active, both winter and summer. So if you start burying hard woody materials in the soil, in the tropics, it rains in summer. Just remember this, humid, hot tropics. When you know you're in the tropics, when you get summer rain, you're in a temperate climate when you have winter rain. Now, you are Mediterranean, so you still get winter rain, but you get very hot, dry summers, right? So the Mediterranean is the last of the temperate climates going towards the equator. That's why it's the worst bushfires. It's the worst fire zone, because you have hot summers that are really dry and all the herbs dry and only the trees are green. And then you have really wet winters where the herbs are green, but the trees often are deciduous. So I often say in summer, it's brown on the ground and green up above. And in winter, it's green on the ground and brown up above. It's one of my sayings about the Mediterranean people need to understand. But you start burying those hard logs under the ground, right? They're only going to start to decompose in your mild winter. And then for most of the year, it's way too dry. And one of the worst things you can have in a dry climate, like a desert, which you are, you're kind of deserty, you've gone very deserty, right, is a mound. You're not going to be able to grow anything on a mound without extra water because it's well drained. You don't need to dry the desert climates, do you? You're better off growing in a pit full of mulch or around a pit full of mulch, a sunken garden, not a raised bed. Herb spirals don't work in the desert. They become a rosemary spiral. Maybe aloe vera and rosemary is about the best you can do with a desert herb spiral. They're not a desert climate element. So just be careful, right? Now, you know, even where you get decomposition of wood, I see people doing Hügel swales. Well, if that wood is going to rot, it's going to collapse the swale mound and potentially cause all sorts of swale collapse, and that has happened. So, you know, my concerns are also, like, if things really work, people get really excited and they take lots and lots of photos of absolute abundance. And some of the Hügelkulturs I've seen look really awkward to work. You know, they're kind of like right up in the air, and you're gonna, you know, it's just awkward to work around this really steep mound and the shallower mounds. Now, I've seen one or two growing a lot of pumpkins and zucchinis maybe and things like that, but they're not easy. They're not hard things to grow. You know, I haven't seen anything growing. I haven't seen any. If any, I don't think I've seen any, but maybe some marginal. That I think, wow, that's amazing. I'm going to have to do a Hügelkultur. Most of the time, I've looked at it and think, I don't know about that. And in fact, I've so many students have asked me about it, and I've often just come up with a simple reply to relieve their anxiety about it in relation to my replies. It's like, well, maybe where banana circles finish and it gets too cool to grow bananas around this mulch pit, Hügelkulturs could begin. But be careful, be careful. That's my, and you know, look for things that you admire for what, you know, people have done, you know, what they've achieved and what they're doing, even if you don't always like what they say. But yeah, just be careful. Look for results. We've got a YouTube world. We've got, you know, Instagram world. We've got, you know, Facebook world. You can see things out there. You can ask. We need a collection of really abundant Hügelkulturs before we invest too much time in it. If it's going to draw the nitrogen out of the soil to decompose the carbon, you know, that's why we don't you know, dig in organic cover crops anymore, because we realised there was a nitrogen drawdown before a nitrogen give back. Well, that's just herbaceous cover crop. We're not talking about big logs of olives. There you go. Okay, Rosetta is asking, Jeff, could you tell us more about making a functional edible fish pond? Can rice be integrated? I have already seen lots of your videos, but love to hear about this in detail. I can't go into too much detail. Aquaculture, it's one of my favorite subjects. I have put in ponds in Vietnam where they quickly put the adjoining swale into a rice swale. So they adjusted their swale to be a floodable paddy swale. Now you could do that with, we've done it a certain amount with water chestnut at Zaytuna Farm. The main thing about your aquaculture ponds is they don't need to be too deep. They need to have a flat bottom. So usually a contour dam is the easiest dam to get a flat bottom. Dams that have, you know, steep sides and come down to a point or a one position sloping internally are really awkward to catch fish out of and manage the layers of temperature in the dam. If you go more than 2 meters deep, you get a thermal layer. You get a cold and a hot layer. And when the temperatures change from winter to summer, you'll get a turnover of the water, which will get all kinds of anaerobic microorganisms that are very prolific in the mud underwater coming to the surface, and you get strange events happening. And also, when you go deeper than 2 meters, you have an unproductive area. So if you have to oxygenate the water a little bit to get more production, mechanically splashing it or spraying it, or having just a water exchange, water coming in and water going out, you're oxygenating more depth of water than you get in production, but you can't just oxygenate the top layer, right? So that's one of the important things, making sure they're not too deep. 1.5 meters to 2 deep is the sort of sweet spot for most fish. Crustaceans, usually 1.5 meters to 1 meter is a better sweet spot. Most emergent plants are 60 centimeters or less. Anchored plants pull up at 2.4. So if you've got lilies all the way across a dam or lotus, you're less than 2.4. So there are layers of vegetation in dams, and then there's edge side plants that grow in the inundated soil that's right on the edge of the pond, dam. So you want to go as steep as you dare for stability running into the pond on the internal slopes, and then as flat as you can across the bottom. Now, having said that, when you get to this hyper cold, right, really cold, well, it's going to freeze. It's going to freeze. Maybe you're going to use it as an ice skating pond, right? You need a deep hole, right? Because the fish need a deep hole to get away from the ice, and they kettle up in there and go completely dormant. Now, that's also an advantage in a hot climate. If you can have a deep hole where your drain pipe comes out of, or you can siphon down to if you haven't got a drain pipe, it's an easy way to harvest, because as you drop the layer of water, all the fish end up in a deep hole. And there they are. You can just net them out with a landing net if you're going to eat them now, because they're all in that deep hole. If you're going to try and keep them there too long, you're going to have to heavily oxygenate it. So if you can sell dead fish, or you want to eat them, right, you can just pull them out. If you want to keep them alive, that's difficult, right, because they're going to panic in that little hole where they're concentrated in there, and they're going to get mud in their gills, and they're not going to live when you get them out. Here's a trick: clove oil. A little bit of clove oil anesthetizes fish. So sneak up on the hole, don't panic them, and drop a little drop at a time of clove oil into that pond that's full of those fish. And all of a sudden they go a bit wobbly, right? You can see them, right? Before they turn upside down and start gulping, when they go a bit wobbly, they're kind of half anesthetized. Whip them out quick, put them in a purging tank on the back of your four-wheel drive, or where you're going to transport them, stick the oxygenator in there, get them to a tank, and then keep the oxygen going, and you're going to then be able to sell them as live fish. A little bit of a trick. There's all kinds of tricks you can do with aquaculture. You can have a drain pipe that has a sleeve over the top, so it comes up to the surface, and all the water goes off the pond through the surface pipe that comes vertically up from your drain pipe. Water's coming in, you've got enough swales and dams upstream, so you've got trickling water coming through, and it's exiting through the pipe at the surface, down out through the drain pipe. That's water coming off the surface. Put a big sleeve pipe over that that's higher than the water, and it's got to come up the sleeve pipe and down from the top in the center drain pipe. That means you're taking water off the bottom of the pond. There are temperatures where fish stay more productive, right? So if it gets too hot, wherever you are, the species of fish you're using, there'll be a top limit where they'll get short of oxygen, they'll gulp at the surface, you're going to have to add oxygen, more expense, you're going to have to increase the oxygen content because it's getting too hot, draws down the oxygen. In the winter, there'll be a temperature where they just become inactive and they kind of go into hibernation, and now they're not growing. So there are all these little tricks. You know, you can put a solar light over the surface at night, really close to the surface. You can even have a light with a little solar fan, and it'll attract moths and bugs and things to the surface, and they'll just drop in the water, and you get a night feeding station. You can have floating rafts that have dead meat, dead animals, dead fish even, that attract flies that get blown with maggots, and they drop in the water. You're feeding fish. You can have ledges on the edge of the pond that you've cut originally, and the water's 60 centimeters or less on the ledge, and you put a bit of a lip on the ledge. It's a bit of a shaping before you fill the pond up. You fill that up with a little bit of soil and gravel and grow all your reeds around the edge, and that's habitat for your shrimps, Now, any fisherman will tell you that shrimps are the best for feeding fish. Crustaceans are the best. So if you've got native fish, shrimps, you can put into that edge of the pond, beauty, right? Now, the chain of life is phytoplankton first, which comes from sunlight and organic matter. Easy, that happens on its own. That's going to happen whether you like it or not. The next one is zooplankton. This is the microorganisms that live in the soil at the bottom of the dam. Remember, shallow lakes and ponds make soil faster than forests, right? So what you need to speed that process up, it'll happen slowly with ducks flying in and bringing bits of dirt on their feet with the microorganisms with them. But what you need to do is go to a really nice dam that's full of life, full of fish, looks really gorgeous, take a bucket of mud from underwater and put it into your new dam or new fish pond. You seeded it with billions, gazillions of microorganisms. That's going to speed the process up. Now, they eat the algae that comes with sunlight and organic matter. The next chain of life is crustaceans, which are shrimps. Now, you may have to go down your local lake or river and get a fisherman's bait trap and grab some, usually at night. They're easier to trap at night. Put a bait trap in at night, pick it up in the morning, and start seeding it with your shrimps. And one female shrimp can have 1,000 eggs underneath her tail and her swimmerets. You're off. Now, manage your shrimp because that's what feeds your fish. And there's a few more that we could talk about, but that'll do. Love, been a fisherman since I was 5. Love it. Okay, one more, and we're going to have to go and check out of our quarantine hotel and start heading home. Okay, Stacey Zegers. I am in Eastern Saudi Arabia. We were just in Saudi before here. And I'd like to garden in pots on a terrace. Which edibles will grow here in pots in this kind of heat? Could I grow rosemary? Could I get rosemary grown? No problem. Are there things that you could stand summer heat if made a shade area? Definitely. There's all kinds. You could grow most of your Mediterranean herbs and a lot of your tropicals. Are there things that could stand to me? I made a shade area. Yeah, shade. And in summer, open up shade. Every article I read about my zone is different than the last. I need a final word, and I trust yours, Jazakallah here. Okay, wicking beds, small and large, wicking beds. That's the answer. Wicking beds with shade over it, you produce miracles. That's what we do in the Dead Sea Valley. Awesome way. You can do it with a cubic meter tote cut in half, or you can do it with small pots. Look into wicking beds. It's the answer of all time. There you go. They're knocking on the door. We've got to go. Great talking to you. I'll keep talking to you because I think you like it. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.